You have been writing about the ongoing conflict in Palestine, and I wanted to start with the US role in this ongoing genocide in Gaza. The Biden administration has now bypassed the Congress twice to pass emergency armed packages, and this is despite a huge documentation about US bombs being dropped in Gaza consistently, including the 2,000 pounds bunker busters that has killed several hundreds. And then there are developments on the other sides, like 60% of Americans don't support Israel in this conflict. There is a new development of US organized labor that is increasingly withdrawing its support. There are constraints on the fiscal side as the US military spending has exceeded $1 trillion, including all the emergency packages. And yet we see a very confident Israel about the US support in this ongoing conflict. Explain to us this.
Well, I think the confidence is misplaced. It has been the fact for decades that the U.S. political system has backed Israel pretty much unconditionally. But I think that this is no longer true. And I think the Israeli leadership calculations are mistaken. The public is very unhappy and very worried about the developments in Gaza. There's very strong opposition to what Israel is doing among younger people. Biden is suffering politically in terms of the opinion polls and election prospects as a result of the disarray of U.S. foreign policy. So I think that if the Israeli government expects that this is the normal smooth ride, they will be mistaken. Now, it's true that there is a powerful pro-Israel lobby. There is a powerful support in the military-industrial complex. It has been the norm in the U.S. Congress to appropriate funds for Israel pretty much without question. Politicians like Biden, who's an old man after all, have taken it for granted that a pro-Israel stand is always the right electoral as well as the right money-raising stand. But I think that this is a wrong assessment by U.S. politicians because the public is not supportive. And it's a wrong assessment, especially by the Israeli politicians who I think are making a very, very serious miscalculation.
Just to stay on this point, I mean, it is often said that while the American public has a huge leverage in terms of, or at least some leverage in terms of influencing its internal policies, when it comes to foreign policy, it is often said that what goes on in the public doesn't influence a lot in terms of the foreign policies. You have mentioned about the Jewish funding, but there are also talks about the American strategic.
Well, it's not just Jewish funding; it's Christian funding. It's
Yes.
there is a quite broad, and it's military-industrial complex funding. It's quite a broad coalition.
Right, absolutely. And I was just coming to the broad region in general. We are seeing a lot of tension with around the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, and rockets being fired by the Houthis, and then US-led coalition has sunk boats on the other side. And we are seeing constant firing across the Lebanon border since October 8th, if not earlier. And effectively, Netanyahu's cabinet, from Gallant to Gantz to his finance ministry, Smotrich, they are essentially calling for war against Iran. Now, to my mind, it's very difficult, or it's almost inconceivable to think about this very extended war by Israel alone if there is no thinking that US is not going to support or back them up. Your thoughts on that?
Well, if the U.S. doesn't back up Israel, Israel can't even keep up the war in Gaza, much less a wider Middle East war. The war in Gaza is supported by U.S. munitions almost on a daily basis. So if the U.S. cuts support, Israel has to stop, period. It's not a matter of extending to Lebanon, the Red Sea, Iran. That would be a major, major war. By the way, a major war not only for Israel, but a major war for the United States as well. And the U.S. has just sent one carrier group back from the region back to the United States. So it's a signal that the U.S. is not at all interested in a wider war. There are crazy U.S. politicians like Lindsey Graham who loves war anytime, anywhere. And he said we need to bomb Iran. He used even more extreme language, but basically, this is not the position of the Pentagon, and it's not the position of the American people. You raised the question of whether the public has some say in foreign policy. In general, not very much. But being an election year this year, it's strange, but foreign policy is much more on the agenda because there's a sense that Biden is incompetent, has lost control, that the U.S. is pulled into too many conflicts. And this is weighing on public opinion, especially because Donald Trump has been against funding Ukraine and the
but not Israel, right?
the Republican base is really not in favor of this spending, or particularly in terms of these wars. It's complicated, but I think in general, the mood in the United States is, my God, we've got enough problems at home. What the hell are we doing getting into more and more and more of these wars? And Biden looks very weak and inconsequential, and he's a poor communicator in general. So this is a time when American public opinion is having an effect, especially in the Republican Party, which is not really wanting to fund Biden's adventures abroad.
I remember this foreign affairs column at the peak of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. It was saying that we should bump up our support for NATO. It's not enough because the Republicans can come and they would definitely withdraw support, and we should keep this going. And we would come to Ukraine. But before that, if you could very quickly, if you could lay out this 8-point proposal that you laid out in one of your columns about how to achieve peace in the region.
Well, it's basically 1 point, which is I would like the UN Security Council today to vote the state of Palestine as a UN member state, and for that to be confirmed by the UN General Assembly, and to get on with the two-state solution. Of course, the current political constellation in Israel is dead set against this. It is absolutely intent on complete control, not only over Israel, but over Palestine. That's the real agenda. It's a self-destructive agenda as well as a deadly agenda vis-a-vis the Palestinian people. And I would like the international community to cut through this and say, look, we've had 57 years of resolutions now, almost 57 years, UN Security Council Resolution 242. And this is that there need to be two states on the 4 June 1967 borders. And that's it. And we're moving to that solution because otherwise, well, there is no solution of peace. So this is not easy to do, but the alternatives are much worse, actually. So this is what I would recommend. Of course, then there would be peacekeepers, and that would be peacekeepers to separate the two sides, and that seems to me to be utterly feasible. There would be a normalization of relations between Israel and the Arab and Islamic neighbors, but based on Palestine being a sovereign state with control over Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Islamic holy sites. but this is what has been on the table for decades. And I would urge the international community to just move to this solution, because under the UN Charter, Security Council has the power to do this. It is in the interests of global peace to do this. There's one country that blocks it from happening, and that's the United States. And I'm hoping that when the overwhelming global opinion is on the other side, and when the alternative is so horrible as it is, and when the Israeli leaders are so vulgar and violent in their stated intentions, that this will also change the US position.
I want to move to Ukraine, but very quickly, if you can respond to just two additional questions on this. One is, as you mentioned about the Republicans either coming to power or taking charge of or continuing charge of Congress and that having some influence. I was wondering if there is a division between Republican policies or intent when it comes to Ukraine or Russia and when it comes to Palestine. Because Donald Trump, for instance, during his presidency, while he was a dovish when it came to Russia, he was an absolute hawkish when it came to not just China, but also in Palestine. I mean, his policies were far more regressive than even some kind of moderate Obama. So that's one point. And the other point is many people now are increasingly disillusioned by the idea of the two-state settlement, two-state solution, given there are these 700,000 settlements and so on and so forth. Very quick response, because we have to discuss the rest of it.
Yeah, don't think of the Republican Party or even Donald Trump as having coherent, unified, consistent ideas, either internally consistent or consistent over time. These are political movements, and Donald Trump himself is not a stable personality. So don't look for consistency. When it comes to one-state solution or two-state solution, they're both possible. I think both parties would prefer a two-state solution. That is also international law. The settlements are illegal. The settlers would have to go home to a very large extent. When those settlements took place, they were known to be illegal. The UN Security Council has been very clear over the years that they are illegal. This is the tragedy. Israel tried to put facts on the ground. Well, it put facts on the ground that have led to disaster. That was predictable at the time. It's happening right now. We need an answer. Okay, they could live in one state, but not an apartheid state. That's not an answer for peace. Or they could live in two states. But if they live in two states, they have to solve the problem that hundreds of thousands of settlers, many of them highly religious zealots, listening to biblical ideas from 2,600 years ago, not current realities in the world, need to adjust to current realities. So this is tough, but the current situation, the status quo, is a complete disaster. So I'm saying go with international law, go with decades of international law, go with the solution that both sides claim they prefer to somehow forcing one state together, and therefore solve the problem even of the settlements.
Let's come to Ukraine. On December 30, the New York Times reports on an Ukrainian bombardment of the Russian city of Volgorod that killed 22 people, perhaps the deadliest single attack on a Russian city since the start of the war. And this has been followed up by what the New York Times reports as heavy barrage of hypersonic Russian missiles into cities like Kyiv and Kharkiv and others. So there seems to be a renewed conflict there. My question basically is, and this is mostly from my reading of the Financial Times, there seems to be an uneasiness within European elites in particular about some sort of reluctance on part of Washington, D.C. about continuing this war in Ukraine. In fact, Financial Times columnists are writing columns encouraging Ukraine to come up with its own war industries because Washington might not help it anymore. Do you see this to be based on ground, or do you think it's a completely misplaced perception?
First, when you read the Financial Times, remember that you're reading a British newspaper. Britain has been Russophobic and at war with Russia essentially for more than 200 years. Britain hates Russia more than just about anything else Britain does. And Britain has been fighting the Crimean War since 1856. So this is just the Financial Times doing its normal thing. And the British media are even more outrageous than the US media. The fact of the matter is two things. One, this war should have and could have been avoided because it's a war over NATO enlargement, and the United States pushed NATO enlargement stupidly, naively, as a gamble, thinking it would get away with anything. It lost the gamble. That's point number one. Point number two is Russia is crushing Ukraine on the battlefield, and Ukraine is bleeding terribly with hundreds of thousands of deaths and casualties, and is outgunned, outmanned, out-technologied, and the U.S. And the West don't have even in their stockpiles right now the 155 millimeter shells and other equipment. Unless this thing goes nuclear, which would end the world, Russia is prevailing on the battlefield. It's a very straightforward, tragic, again, utterly predictable point. Let me be clear: the U.S. is completely incompetent in foreign policy. So these debacles are foreseeable. These are not retrospective ideas. The Financial Times is filled with nonsense if it thinks that Ukraine is going to fight this on its own. But what it's saying that the U.S. is not pursuing this is probably true. The Congress is going to return this month, most likely turning down further funding for Ukraine. I sure hope so. This funding doesn't do Ukraine any good. It just kills more and more people in Ukraine. It just keeps the war going. Of course, in the end, the military-industrial complex has a powerful lobby, and it may be able to keep another round of some level of aid. But the fact of the matter is the U.S. public is against continued funding. The war is not going the way that these fools in the administration believed that it would, or these gamblers believed that it would. And so I think we are in an end game, and there should be negotiations, just as there were negotiations last year in March and April 2022 that would have ended the war. But the United States said, no, you have to keep fighting because we want to keep enlarging NATO. It's pretty much as simple as that. We need to negotiate an end to the war based on no NATO enlargement.